Hi, everyone.
Hi there.
Hey, Sarah.
Hello.
So Sarah, Pam's not going to be with us tonight.
Okay. Gonna give it just another minute for Kim here. Any sign of Kim in the waiting room?
I disabled the waiting room, so I should just pop in if she comes.
Okay.
Ed, it's good to see you. I was beginning to think maybe you had left us, gone south. for the
No.
winter.
Been, how do I say it? Distracted with family issues.
Gotcha. Well, it's nice to see you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. And looks like we have the four of us. Kim, Pam's not joining us this evening, so.
Okay.
All right, so calling meeting to order at 6:02. First on the agenda, approval of treasurer's warrants, payroll warrants for January 21st, 2022 and January 28th, 2022. Open for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Terry, seconded by Dusty. Any questions, discussion? Okay, calling for a vote. Terry,
Yes.
Dusty,
Yes.
Kim?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Motion passes 4-0. Without Kim here, you're gonna have to do a lot of work here, Terry, with the motion.
I just realized that I don't have my my partner in this, business of getting it all done. So I'm huffing here. Ready, go.
Accounts payable warrants, January 25th, 2022 and February 1st, 2022, open for motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions, discussion? Okay, seeing none, calling for a vote. Terry,
Yes.
Dusty,
Yes.
Kim?
Yes.
I vote yes. Motion passes 4-0. Approval of the minutes, January 18th, 2022. I'm open for motion.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Terry, second by Kim. Any questions, corrections? Seeing none, calling for a vote. Terry,
Yes.
Dusty,
Yes.
Kim?
Yes.
And I vote yes, motion passes 4-0.
Always a nice job, Jackie. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do not have any special presentations or awards. Moving down to number 4, committee appointments. Ryan Deminy, Water District Trustee, open for a motion.
I move to appoint Ryan Dimony a Water District Trustee.
Second.
Okay. Actually, would you mind finishing the motion?
I wondered if I needed to do that. Yeah. I move to appoint Ryan Dimony, Water District Trustee, to fill a vacated term expiring June 14, 2022.
Thank you. And Kim, did you second that?
I did. All of
Thank
it. Second. part.
Okay. All right. Any questions, discussion?
Pam would have known to do that right.
Seeing none, calling for a vote. Terry,
Yes.
Dusty,
Yes.
Kim,
Yes.
I vote yes. Motion passes 4-0. Thank you to Ryan for filling that vacancy. We do not have any public hearings tonight. Public comments. So opening up to anyone from the public who would like to speak on something that is not on the agenda. Feel free to wave your hand around, or if you don't have video, unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Going once. Not seeing anyone. Last call for public comment. Okay, moving on. Number 7 under Department Head Committee Chair, a broadband committee request for funding. You should have received this in your packet. Dennis or Dusty, anything you want to say? Dusty being the liaison to the broadband committee before we start discussion on this, or?
I'm good.
Yeah, we talked about this a couple of weeks. This is the committee's recommendation on how we proceed with fiber optic and broadband improvements. So yeah, I'll let Carla say what she wants to say.
Go ahead, Carla.
Well, we prepared the budget and the goals for next year. And we see this next year pretty much in planning mode unless things move more quickly than we imagine. But we have 2 pieces to this proposal. One is to update the 2019 broadband infrastructure plan that was done and is now out of date given what's happened post-pandemic. And well, we're not quite post-pandemic, in the pandemic. And secondly, to talk about what's needed for the equity and the ability to access broadband and use it. And this is often referred to as digital equity. And so we're also proposing to work with Susan Corbett, who's a leader in this, and develop a more extensive plan that would tap volunteer time, hopefully in Wiscasset, and hopefully we can coordinate both build out of infrastructure and the digital equity piece of this with Dresden and Woolwich. They are not as far along as we are, so we're not certain that's going to work, but if it did, it would help reduce our costs. I don't know if it's easier to go to respond to your questions or if I should go through the document that we submitted to Dennis. Yeah, Terry. Or I don't know if I'm supposed to call him Terry.
Go ahead, Terry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My question has to do with the line, it could reduce this budget up to $3,700. So the total is $15,000. The town would commit $7,500. An additional $7,500 would be maybe leveraged from the Island Institute grant program. And if Dresden and Woolwich came on board with us, it would reduce the budget ask. When the confusion is, it says up to $3,700. Does that mean it would reduce it down to 3,700 for our part? Is that what you meant?
I think we were looking at what would happen, and Evan can jump in here too. What would happen if Woolwich and Dresden participated on the digital equity and the planning for infrastructure, where we might share the same consultant, and it would reduce the cost. So it wouldn't be down to 3,700.
It would be down to.
But
Reduced by 37.
there's also potential, I'm sorry, there's also potential savings in the line item. I think it's $1,000 for the community education project, depending on what happens with the state and allocating some money that we anticipate is going to come for what they call a community building process that would help us. Evan, do you want to jump in here in terms of where the budget, that piece of the budget?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is definitely savings could be found in the planning portion, specifically building a feasibility study or updating the 2019, as Carla referred to, if Woolwich and Dresden were involved, and also in digital equity.
And do we have
Planning.
any kind of sense when we'll know if they would be partners in that?
The Dresden folks I know are just about ready to either form the committee if they haven't already. And I've talked to them a little bit, and Woolwich is still a wait and see. But I think that there's pretty much it's a win-win, and there's no downside of them, of all three of us, at least in the planning stage, joining forces and splitting some costs. And then whether or not these three towns are together later on, that's yet to be seen, but definitely could save some money now.
Terry?
Evan and Carla, are y'all actively pursuing Woolwich and Dresden in forming this team, or are you just sort of letting them contact you? And I think you can tell that I'm interested in your being proactive.
Right.
Well,
Well, we have been to some degree, and now Evan's been more proactive recently. We've reached out to them. They were not, Dresden was part of the initial study. So they did get that where we were having an initial study in 2019. Woolwich has nothing that I know of. And so they're starting from ground one. Ground zero, I guess. And but they've got some good leadership in Woolwich with what's the town councilor and
Allison
Hepler. She's also a state rep.
oh,
rep.
right. Yes.
And so she's been, from what I can tell, leading the charge, but you've been talking to her probably more recently. Yep. And we did that early, because we know that towns that work together are going to get more priority for funding. Yeah. And so we're really trying to do that. Mm-hmm. I did reach out to Westport, but Westport wasn't at this point interested. And it's conceivable somebody else might come along with us if we really haven't, get going on this, and they see that there's already expertise developing and that they might want to get on the bandwagon, which would bring it down and give us better positioning for competitive position for grants. And Dresden, you've been going to some of the meeting. I made a few phone calls, and you've gone to a meeting or two.
Yep. And
But
they've got a
hard.
new town manager there that's got experience doing broadband expansion works with towns. He was last in Monson, I think, for about 4 years. So he brings that experience to a rural side of expanding broadband.
But I have to say, we shouldn't wait for them. Because we should get our stuff ready as quickly as possible to be competitive. And if we don't see the movement there, I think we just have to keep going. We're pretty confident that we can get the money from the Island Institute. They've already seen a draft, of what we're thinking about. And I think the money's ours if we can put up the match for it.
Terry?
So perhaps if we moved ahead and Dresden wanted to join us, they could maybe buy in. Is there that kind of a thought?
Definitely. I think,
Okay. And then Woolwich could too.
definitely.
Okay, so that makes it more attractive. I'll tell you what, Carla, you have done just a heck of a job putting this together. Thank you. And I think that the budget is magnificent. I know that Dusty was whipping the horses all the way on the budget. Looks great. What a bargain. What a bargain. Are we ready for a motion, Madam Chairman?
I know I at least have a couple other questions.
It's a big undertaking,
just-
definitely.
You may have sort of answered this when you first started talking about this, Carla, but for the contract with Susan Corbett, is the contract for a digital equity and inclusion plan? Like, what's the product?
Yeah, it's a plan. It's a plan, how we reach out, how we work with others, how getting the best of her experience on volunteerism. That is a question in our mind, given how straight out people are. And can we get the volunteer activity to make that work? Because at this point, we're not budgeting for that. But it's also her knowledge of where all the grant money is for subsidizing people to use their internet. There's a lot of money in the money coming down in the ARPA funds for that. And as I've said before, Susan's a national expert on this. So she would give us a roadmap of how to work together. And she would be very interested in trying to get Woolwich and Dresden on board as well. It makes the time easier. For each town, it would be $500 less for us if another town comes on board.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
And then my other big question was on staff support. Nothing against you, Evan, but I guess I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, in the sense that there are a number of committees that we have that I feel like folks are doing a ton of work as volunteers. And so I just don't want to set a precedent that one committee's getting staff support paid and another one's not, if you see what I mean. And I'm thinking like ordinance review committee and stuff like that.
I anticipate doing primarily all volunteer work, but insofar as where we're going to need professional grant prep, whether it's through MECED or through Lincoln County Regional Planning Commission. I'm not a professional grant writer by any means, but I'm 2-0, so we'll keep going. But definitely something that's beyond just a volunteer basis.
So, Dennis, I don't know if you can help with this, but you mentioned Lincoln County Regional Planning. That's what I was sort of thinking when you mentioned planners. Is that something that perhaps they could help with, since we already have a contract? Or
Yes.
I assume it's in the budget for next year.
Yes, sure.
Okay.
The broadband applications are pretty specific as well, and it takes technical ability. Usually if you have a partner in mind for it, they help write it, especially the technical part of it. And I think Evan might have more of that than I do, but certainly in terms of determining the need and, the demographics and trying to get more data on what's happened since the pandemic. This is actually something I want to ask you, Sarah, because your experience with the returns on the comp plan and the marijuana survey, we have some money in there to do a mailer. Well, we're going to probably need more if we actually did it to everybody. I understand it costs more than $1,500. And we feel we can easily get that from moving things around in the budget that won't be fully spent. but we're not sure we need it. So that's a conversation we should have as well. But a lot of the background work is certainly stuff I've done. So I don't, it's not a problem to do that kind of work. It's the technical work that's going to need the backup for a plan to actually do an infrastructure plan.
Right, but that would be under the other contract, correct?
Yeah, I'm sorry, which other
You
contract?
said infrastructure plan, that would be
Yeah,
under,
we have Axiom, we've worked with Axiom in 2019. They did the 7 towns, I think it was, and I think it's 7 in Lincoln County. Dresden was also part of that. That needs to be updated. I don't know what the town rules are with using a contractor that we've already participated with, if it's a no bid contract or a sole source contract. But they would be the likely people to do this and would not charge as much given the experience that they already have with us. And we have them in this budget, assuming that we could move forward. That budget number might change if it's not Axiom.
do you have any idea how much the original study was?
No, actually, I don't.
I can say that the one that Newcastle and Damascotta paid for was $9,600 total, which was split 4,800 by the towns and then 4,800 by the 4,900, excuse me. 4,900 and 4,900, the 2 towns splitting 4,900 and LCI, the provider, providing the other half.
But they were starting from scratch, right? They didn't have any of the background that
Correct.
Axiom already did.
And in terms of this update, do you have any sense of, because I know part of the reason why you're bringing this to us now is in the interest of time, do you have any idea how long this update is going to take to do?
Yeah, Mark's pretty busy if he does it. The real problem is, I don't think it's going to take a huge amount of time. It's more getting his attention on his agenda, given how many towns are tapping him, to do their plans or to actually build out their systems. So, I mean, we can get feedback on that. I've known him for years, so he tells me I'm a priority, but we'll see when push comes to shove. So
The other piece of that is with 3 towns, it becomes kind of a different animal because the Lincoln County 7-town study was basically each individual town having its own blueprint, but then having a secondary design where there's a 3-town network is a slightly different thing, but I think according to Mark should be able to be done pretty easily.
I mean, I think with some of the questions in the budget, partly what would, I haven't worked on a town budget like that or with the town or any town on a budget. So I don't know if you can put a budget like this together, knowing that stuff might get shifted around, not more than what we have in here right now, and how that might work, working with Dennis on it, or if every change in it or potential change comes to the committee for, to the select board for approval.
Yeah, and obviously if we were able to bring it down, I guess as much as possible in terms of the things you've listed for partnerships, that is a big difference in terms, Kim or Dusty, any questions or comments from you guys? I've been asking a lot here.
Yeah, there was something about the Island Institute's matching grants and the budget. Are they giving us, it's a 100% match, equal match?
That's
Yeah.
what we're going to ask for.
Okay. And
And
That's
then
why
we'll have that.
keeping it at that level is good for match with Island Institute.
And should we get your guys' commitment, then we would prepare a grant application for the next meeting for you guys to approve.
and there's also a county initiative to do the community education part of it.
This was the community connector thing. I mentioned that to Dusty. It hasn't been approved yet, but we think it's going to come through.
Yeah. So just the sense that I have is that we're kind of committing to various tasks that have price tags on them. And we don't really expect to spend this amount. So I don't know how to word a motion necessarily, but just maybe to authorize the town manager to use ARPA funds to supply the proposed budget up to the amount that's requested or whatever.
So in terms of, in other words, like if we find out a month from now, Dresden is in, for example, to then reduce the amount.
Yeah, and I would suspect that as we begin doing the work and we move toward budget time and we put this kind of work into the regular town budget, that'll take over as well. So yeah, I guess what I'm saying is the requested amount 7,500, but we shouldn't expect to spend close to that.
Yeah, and I guess just knowing what's not knowing, but anticipating a very tough budget cycle here. And I know there are other folks who are going to be asking for increases in terms of departments and that sort of thing. I guess I'd like us to try to bring this down as much as we can, doing things like finding out are folks from the Lincoln County Regional Planning Commission qualified to help out with this type of a thing. I think this is really important work. I am totally on board with that. I'm just trying to look at it from a budget perspective in terms of just trying to get it down to as the least costly we can go.
And
I think we anticipated 15,000 just as a high end, just so that we can get an appropriate amount of ARPA funds to get a match for the grant and then plan on coming in under budget.
I have a question though, because this project is eligible for ARPA. Dennis would know where else you're looking at it in your current budget requests for your work or for other committees. But this is specifically targeted for ARPA, in terms of eligibility for ARPA money.
So we would just set up a special account for this. So it wouldn't be commingled with the town's other funds. So we would set up a special revenue account for this, and any bills would just have to come into the town and be paid as they accrue. So as far as the municipal budget goes, this is just not part of that process.
Okay. And I guess the natural next question would be, what would we be using it for if not this?
There's a lot of things we could use it for: wastewater, audio video equipment, ventilation system for this building so that we can get back to meetings into the meeting room. Anything that's COVID related, there's certainly a long list of options available out there.
Dennis, could you remind us how much we're able to pull down from ARPA funds?
We currently have $18,744 left in this half. And then sometime either August or September, we will get the other 198,300, whatever it was.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah, Terry?
No more questions. I think that this is a high priority for our town. And I want to go on record as being strongly supportive, putting this in our budget. Perhaps as Dennis, how is the motion to be made? Are we establishing a line item for this particular budget?
I think you need a motion to approve using $7,500 from the ARPA fund for the broadband committee study, I guess is what this is. And we'll set up a special revenue account for it.
Thank you. I wasn't sure whether we were doing that. Okay. I wish I could say so move.
I guess before you make that motion, I I would love it to say up to, in the hopes that we can find some savings, both in what you've already written down here and what I said in terms of Lincoln County regional planning.
Dusty, would you like to make this motion since it's your committee?
Sure. I move that we authorize the town manager to provide up to $7,500 of ARPA funds for the broadband committee studies.
Second.
Any further questions or discussion? Seeing none, calling for a vote. Terry,
Yes.
Dusty,
Yes,
Kim,
Yes.
I vote yes. Motion passes 4-0. Thank you for your
Thank
good
you.
work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Take care.
All right. Get my agenda back here. All right, so moving on to 7B, Waterfront Committee 2022 waterfront fees. You should have that also in your packet, the proposed new fees. Open for motion or discussion, both?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the new waterfront fees.
Second.
Moved by Kim, seconded by Terry. Any questions or discussion on the list of fees?
Sue is here if anybody has any questions for waterfront.
Another hardworking chairman. Fantastic job, Susan.
Dusty?
I just had one question about the increase in the mooring permit fees. They were doubled for non-residents and more than doubled for residents. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Go ahead, Susan.
You're asking me, okay. Well, what we had done, we've been collecting data on mooring fees and slip fees for lots of marinas and harbors up, through the mid-coast. And we looked at, our fees are drastically outdated. And going forward, we were thinking if we went, I know it's more than doubled, but we're thinking this will be good for, say, 2 or 3 years out. So we won't have to come back next year and or like that. That was our thinking, was to go a little higher and have it be good for a couple of years. But our fees were quite low comparatively.
Kim?
I would just add that the last 3 select boards requested the waterfront committee to increase those fees so we could be more competitive too. So thank you, Susan. I think it looks great.
Oh, thank you, Kim.
Any other questions or discussion? Okay, calling for a vote on the motion.
Was there a
Terry?
motion?
Oh,
Yes.
motion to approve was Terry and Kim. Yes, I think.
Oh, was it?
Okay.
Yes.
Terry,
Yes.
Dusty,
Yes,
Kim,
Yes.
I vote yes. Motion passes 4-0. Thank you,
Thank
Susan.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, moving down to 8A, James Weldon Johnson Memorial, Representative Rachel Talbot Ross. I'll pass it over to you if I see you on the screen, if you want to unmute yourself.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I want to just start by thanking the select board, town manager Simmons, chair Whitfield, and all of you for the opportunity to join you this evening and talk very briefly about the James Weldon Johnson efforts at the state level, and to see how we can craft a way forward in honor of this extraordinary American's life and legacy. I want to just acknowledge that Dr. Meadow Dibble is here with us from the Permanent Commission on the Status of Racial, Tribal, and Indigenous Populations. I know that you have met with her in the past, and she is absolutely here to help us move this conversation forward. She's done an extraordinary amount of work thus far in getting us here. So just, I also want to just acknowledge Lucia Droby and Terry Heller, who are really, really great champions of James Weldon Johnson and champions of the role of Wiscasset in realizing his life and how it will be made visible here in the state of Maine. So just thank you for your work. I see Dusty's here and a couple of other friends. So just a real quick recap. As you know, last June, LD 1441 went into law, was signed by the governor. It did two things. It established the James Weldon Johnson Day in the state of Maine annually every June 17th. And it established a James Weldon Johnson Observance Task Force, which is housed in the Permanent Commission under the direction of Dr. Dibble, who is the Director for Community Engaged Research. That law also had a set of duties embedded in it. Several of them relate to some of the work that you all have been leading over the last couple of years. One of the mandates is to educate the public on the life of James Weldon Johnson. In order, and this is very important, in law it says in order to further his life's mission and to look at systemic racism. As a civil rights leader, a poet, an author, an educator, a diplomat, the work that will pick up from what he already laid forth is really within the context of eliminating systemic racism and realizing true justice and equality for all. Another duty is to create this task force and to look at other models in the country for the James Weldon Johnson observance. It is to look at ways in which we can continue to memorialize his life. That includes a host of things, from markers to scholarship programs, to writing programs, to art fellowships, all kinds of different creative ways in which to memorialize his life. So June is when the bill became a law. Many of you joined us in December, in which we had a day-long event in Wiscasset. We purposely came to Wiscasset to honor both the place of his untimely death, but all of the work from Reverend Al to Lucia and Terry and educators in that area have been doing to realize James Weldon Johnson's life. So we had a day-long event last December. And the purpose of that event was really to bring all stakeholders together and to brainstorm on ways that we wanted to realize the new law. Following the December gathering, there was a task force was put together, of which several of you sit on, and we held our first task force meeting. So I give you that chronology because it's really, really important to understand that Wiscasset holds a very, very, very special place in trying to acknowledge the life and legacy of James Weldon Johnson. And what we really want to do is to make sure that we all come together in trying to do this work. The task force itself is officially charged with looking at things like markers and other ways of memorializing his life. So I'm coming to you tonight in hopes that you will allow for the task force to figure out all of the ways in which the observance can happen on June 17th, starting this year, and the ways in which we can strategically fund, organize, collaborate on how to memorialize his life, and hope that we can agree that Any kind of memorializing should be led by this task force, again, of which you have members on, and which include very significantly members of the African-American community here in Maine, including those who have participated and helped lead the efforts of the NAACP here in Maine, of which James Weldon Johnson played a very significant role in. But that task force is diverse. It has people on there that have a very vested interest in how this man's life is memorialized, and want to have a say in that, because it's not just about how he died. It is absolutely about how he lived. And I'm hoping that we can have a discussion about that, so that that statewide diverse voice can help figure out the ways in which we should move forward together. And I'm certainly open for a discussion. I want to thank you all for the work that you've done so far, and really hope that you see that this task force is one in which supports the efforts, various efforts from around the state to acknowledge this great American.
Thank you very much. I just want to note, Dennis is helping out with a medical emergency that's happening in the town office parking lot, so that's why he's run out. So I just wanted, he wasn't trying to get out of the discussion. Open it up to any questions, thoughts from select board. And I do want to acknowledge all the work that Lucia and others have done up to this point in terms of putting together ideas and designs.
I without any comments or questions, I just really want to make a specific ask to the select board, and that is that you allow the task force time to take shape, to figure out its scope, to figure out it's the funding for all of this activity, that you allow the task force to figure out its work before any markers go up in the town of Wiscasset, before any more work continues for a marker. I understand it's a fairly a self-imposed deadline that has been set, if one has been set at all. And we are asking you to hold off on that work until we can figure out collectively the design of that work, the language in that work, where it's placed, what it looks like, if it's a plaque, if it's trees, whatever it looks like. We're just asking you to have some patience with the task force process, to engage with the task force, and for that to lead the efforts at looking at memorializing James Weldon Johnson's life. So it's a very specific ask that I'm placing to the select board this evening.
Understood. Dusty.
I was wondering if you're thinking in terms of like scheduling a workshop with us. Should we hold off on that? Is there things to figure out before we get to that point?
Are you asking me, Dusty?
Yes.
I am asking you to help me think it through, I think, and that is the statewide task force is really the place where discussions about memorializing and what that looks like should take place. So I'm asking you to allow for the task force to continue to meet and learn about models from all over the country. I mean, this is indeed an international figure that we need, that we're talking about. And we'd like to coordinate our local, regional, national, and international efforts, but we've only met once. So Dusty, I'm not asking for a workshop at this time. I'm asking for the task force to be able to meet and figure out how it wants to move forward and the scope of what it wants to do. And then we could come back and do a presentation to this board once that work has been concluded.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but so for everybody in the room, we were originally on the track of Lucia was going to come back with the design for the plaque, and then we would move forward in whatever direction from there. So basically please correct me, Representative Talbot Ross, if I'm incorrectly stating what you're trying to say, is that you'd like us to hold off on that process until there's a recommendation from the task force. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Terry, did you want to add something?
Just wanted something of a timeline idea from Representative Talbot Ross. So I think I had already asked if it was possible to foresee that the task force would move in such a timely manner that we all would be able to complete this process together and have the fruits of our work on June 17th. Is that right?
Is it okay to answer, Chair?
Oh,
Madam
yes,
Chair?
please.
Okay, so the deadline, the dates that we have according to the law is that the Permanent Commission needs to return to the legislature a report on its progress to create the task force and to move this material forward. That date we have asked the state legislature for that report to be due after the first annual observance so that we can include information and material on how that first observance took place, and can give additional recommendations to the state legislature on if there are any other ways in which the state can help us move all of that work forward. So Terry, the deadline for that is after the first observance would be an official report to the state legislature. In terms of the observance, there is no prescription for it. We can do basically whatever we creatively think about. So there is no pressure for a plaque to be unveiled, for a park to be named, for trees to be planted, whatever that looks like. The observance is ours to determine, and there is no pressure for it to look or feel any particular way. The task force needs to figure out how it would like to observe the first annual James Weldon Johnson Day. It will have a proclamation from the governor, but that's still to be determined, if that helps.
So sorry, go ahead, Terry. I was just going to clarify. So the recommendation for whatever physical memorial there would be from the task force would not necessarily be before the first observance.
That's correct. And I will put an asterisk around that because I think there's an if there is a memorial. We have to take into consideration this man's entire life. And so I'm not sure, and it's not my decision to make, but I'm not sure the first plaque or the first memorial should be marking his death. There's a life that existed that has real prominence in American history. And we need the time to figure out all of the ways in which to honor that life, that legacy, to continue his work, and yes, to also mark the place of his death. But we need the time to figure all that out. I'm not sure that the first memorial is the one that marks his death.
So I guess to the board, the way I'm kind of feeling is I'm fine with holding off for now. I just, and I know a couple of people from our town are on the task force. I guess I would just, as the chair, it's sort of my job to make sure that the town is represented in any of these discussions. So I would just ask that happens, but I guess I'm personally okay with waiting a bit for a recommendation. What do others feel?
I'm fine with it. And I apologize for pushing to get some kind of sense of a timeline here because, and I wanted it on the record that, I have before said, I really hoped that this first year we would have something to mark that day as our first day here. But I'm not pushing for a marker to be erected on that day. I'm glad that I'm on the task force, and I appreciate you so much, Representative Talbot Ross. Your leadership is remarkable. And Dusty and I, as members of your task force, and Kim too, I think, Wiscasset is well represented. The town is well considered on the task force. I don't think we're in any danger of not collaborating. It's going to be organic. We'll all be collaborating on this thing. Is that what I understand?
If I could answer the question, Madam Chair,
Yeah.
it is critical that you're there. Really, 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 it is just so important that you're there. And that Wiscasset's voice is a prominent voice within the work that we do. I dare say, and again, I can't decide, but I dare say that we will be probably in Wiscasset on June 17th. I hope we are. I hope that there are some ways in which we are lifting up the contributions that Wiscasset can make in telling this story. But I don't want to prescribe this early on what that looks like without the input of other stakeholders across this state and indeed the region and nationally. I don't want that prescribed before we have the opportunity to really come together and align our thoughts and our efforts and our hopes.
I'm good with it, Madam Chairman.
Kim or Dusty, I'm not sure we have to vote on this, but
I guess it's fine with me as well. I just wanted to make sure that we did something to honor James Weldon Johnson. And this is a conversation that was started, it was initiated in our town prior to James Weldon Johnson Day, prior to the Permanent Commission and prior to the task force. And when it was originally raised, I think it started with the people in Jacksonville who somehow connected with Lucia Drobey. And there was some pushback just from local residents who didn't understand why we would do this. And so, some of us got behind the idea to say, like, look, let's do this. Let's honor this person. But if now that has evolved into a larger thing and the task force will take the lead, that's fine. We'll absolutely collaborate. I hope that if politics change, leadership changes, down the road in our state, that the task force doesn't go away before it has an opportunity, honor James Weldon Johnson and do the other work that we had started at one time.
So if I may, Madam Chair,
Sure.
Thank you for those remarks. I would just say two things: that regardless of the whims of the political environment, the Permanent Commission on the Status of Racial, Indigenous, and Tribal Populations can only be taken away through another act of legislation. And I dare say that would be a difficult thing to do. So this task force doesn't live within any one legislator's tenure. It is a permanent commission and purposefully so. So I do want to acknowledge that, yes, those things are possible, but we did do whatever we could to insulate the Permanent Commission and the task force within that house. And I will say that I'm so appreciative that Wiscasset did show an early interest in this. But I will let you know that as a 9th generation African-American Mainer, that we've been singing Lift Every Voice and Sing since I can remember. And so James Weldon Johnson lived in our hearts long before Wiscasset learned about James Weldon Johnson as well. The Black community has been carrying that man's life and legacy, his words. We've been carrying that in our hearts for a while, for generations. So I just really need for you all to understand that this is a beloved human being in our community. And we would just like the opportunity to figure out, along with you, how it's best to keep his life and his legacy alive here in the state of Maine.
Thank you. Any last thoughts on the board? Okay, well.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate being with you this evening. And I just want to acknowledge again, Dr. Dibble, and say that if any of you need any more information or you'd like to meet again, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We appreciate all that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, and we look forward to hearing updates.
Will do.
Okay. All right. Moving down to 9, new business, FY20 audit, Fred Brewer. Dennis, did you want to kick us off? And I hope everything's okay there.
Fred, you still with us, I hope? There you are.
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay. Yeah, I don't really need to kick it off. I think Fred can take it from here.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I will share my screen if Dennis will let me.
Hold on.
Then I can go through the audit with you.
Find you on the list here, Fred. You're here somewhere. There you are.
Okay. Can everybody see the schedule of expenditures of federal awards?
Yes.
So this schedule here lists out all of the federal monies that you spent during the year. So because the Wiscasset School Department is part of the town, their federal funds are included in this schedule of expenditures of federal awards. So the reality, what the town actually took in and spent was very little, but it was the school that took in $500,000 and spent it between the school lunch program, which was $170,000, and the Title I and local entitlement funds, which was another $340,000. So it was about $512,000 that was spent last year in federal monies. So in the prior year, 2019, you'd spent over $750,000, which required what they call a single audit. So we didn't have to do that this year because what was spent was less than that $750,000. So I will keep moving up. This one's going to be a little bit harder to see because it's so large, but this is all of the grant funds. So Dennis was talking about special revenue funds. That's where these are. So you can see that this is a mix. So there's a lot of town stuff going down until you get to about the PEPG grant, local entitlement. Those are all school related grants. So if I go down, you took in $472,000 in local taxpayer money, $800,000 in grants from everyone else. So it's 1.3 million that you took in. You spent 1.3 million. So the net change was about 22,000. There were some funds transferred in. That $233,000 was the TIF money. $14,000 went out to the economic development. The $40,000 is a grant for the school. So your special revenue accounts actually increased $283,000 to $484,000. If you go through and look at the accounts on the right-hand side, this is their balance at the end of the year. There's a few of them that are overexpended. Most of the school ones have been overexpended for a while. The town ones, a lot of it, you were waiting on grant-related money to come in, like the brownfields money and the money for the improvements to the airport. So there's this $116,000. That's actually funds that are being escrowed, and they've been spent subsequently. So keep moving on. So here are your capital reserves. So you have some funds that have been essentially saved in prior years and invested. So this is HM Payson. So you can see there's receipts, which there's actually very little receipts, is $1,400. Some of that was cemetery lots and some of it was just grant funds that were received. But if you look, $843,000 is what you had for investment income on the $14 million. That's $11 million that's in the reserve accounts. So you transferred $518,000 out here, and some of that went to the general fund to reduce taxes and other went to specific projects. So at the end of the day, even though you took those funds out, there's still $11 million in the reserves. Do you have any questions on the reserve accounts? Nope. Okay, I'll keep going. So the reason why I start in the back is because a lot of this information gets consolidated in the fund financial statements as you move forward. So these are your trust funds. Most of it is the cemetery trust. So that had a $147,000 increase. You took $100,000 out for the operations, which that's the transfers. So there's still almost $3.6 million in the trust funds. And some of those can be spent for only specific purposes. And a lot of them are related to the school for scholarships. So that was the $1,000 from the Ralph Hilton scholarship that the school paid out. Keep moving forward. So as I said, a lot of this stuff gets consolidated. So these are the non-major funds. So we have to do a calculation of 10% of the total funds. And these are the funds that didn't meet that threshold. So in the previous big schedules that we saw in the back, these are the small ones that are in there. So you can see there's still $1.5 million in smaller funds that the town received. You spent 1.7 of it. There were some transfers. So there's still 3.6 million in those funds, but the detail is in the back. This here is the balance sheet for those funds. So you can see there's $120,000 in cash. Majority that's that escrow account, which was used to pay for the improvements at the end of Birch Point Road. You've got your smaller capital projects funds. So there's $1.3 million in investments there. You get your liabilities. So there's deferred revenue of $56,000 for the airport. So the breakdown of those funds is 3.6 million. Some of it's restricted. It can only be used for a specific purpose. It's committed for capital projects, or it's assigned. Keep moving forward. So this is the cash that the town has. So there are multiple cash accounts. So you've got cash on hand, which is the cash drawers that the staff use to make change. You've got the general fund checking, which is $2.5 million. It was about $197,000 in outstanding checks that hadn't cleared. The school checking has $477,000 in it. The payroll account, because of timing, is a negative $286,000. So that was transferred after July 1st. And then you have the debit credit account, which was set up to keep the debit and credit card transactions separate from the general fund checkbook as a security measure. So you get 2.8 million in cash in the general fund. This is a breakdown of the tax commitment. This is one of the things that people are usually looking at pretty closely. So you committed a little over $9 million in taxes. You had $550,000 that was outstanding. And then you collected about 8.5 million, which was about 94% of what you committed for taxes. So that's fairly good collection percentage. A lot of people's collection percentages have actually been increasing. So you can see the computation of assessment, even though you asked the taxpayer for $9 million, your total budget was 12. So you had other sources of funds, whether it's excise taxes, ambulance revenue, the Maine Yankee impact fee. They all help to offset the $12 million in expenses that you planned on having. So the bottom thing down there, the $53,000 is called overlay. You're allowed up to 5% of what your assessment is. So you were well below that amount. This is the departmental operations. So this is the operations of the town. So here are the revenues. So you can see there were some things, because this was the very beginning of COVID, there were things that were revenues that were under budget. So the fees and permits, because everything is pretty much closed up for the beginning of the summer in 2020, your fees and permits were down. Luckily, your excise taxes were about what you budgeted, which was good, because what happened with a lot of towns was you had April, May, and June motor vehicle registrations that happened in July. So a lot of people had more in the way of excise collections in the 2021 fiscal year. You can see your EMS fees. You did better than what you planned on. Your leisure services. So this is the community center. Those revenues did not meet the budget. So that was $112,000 shortfall. So if you look at the general government, you guys did really well this year managing your budget. There were actually no accounts that were overspent. So this here is looking at what you carried over. So it's easier to see with the school. So they had about $1.6 million. You gave them another $6 million. They had some cash receipts for revenue. They spent 7.4, and then they had 60,000 that they transferred out. So there's $1.3 million left at the end of the day for them. So what you were under budget was $537,000. So that gets added to your undesignated fund. So if you combine that with your revenues that you were under budget on, that added this $620,000 to your undesignated funds. So at the beginning of the year, you started at 132,000. You added that 620. There were some changes in the non-spendable taxes, and then the deferred property taxes went down. So that added $57,000 to your undesignated funds. So at the end of the day, your undesignated fund was $747,000. So it's significantly better than what it has been in prior years. So bravo for building that up a little bit. And there is a direct correlation between that and how much cash you have on hand. So we were looking at that cash schedule before. So you've got a decent cash balance, which helps get you through future months. Whether you, I mean, COVID's a perfect example of this. People couldn't get into the town office to pay their property taxes, so you were waiting to get the cash in to pay your own bills. So if you've got a little bit of undesignated funds, you can weather that storm. So the Schedule Bs in the financial statements are all what they call non-required supplementary information. So it's all additional information that's not required by the accounting standards, but we feel that it's pertinent information to making decisions about the operations of the town. So these here are the Schedule As, they're required information. So this is all related to the teacher's retirement system. This is the PLD plan, which is what the town offers to their employees. So the Public Works, the town office, they're all part of the main PERS system. So that's the PLD plan. And then there's the SET plan, which is the teacher's plan. So you can see $51,000 went into the staff's retirement. And then for the teachers, $187,000 went in. And you can see this is over a 10-year time period. So we haven't completed 10 years since they implemented this accounting standard. So you can see how it's been over the last 7.
Mm.
This is more information with regards to the main PERS. So you can see the pension liabilities. So the actuaries have calculated what they think your liability is. So if you didn't put any more money into the main PERS system, they estimate that $303,000 would be your pension liability to fully fund the staff's retirement. For the SET plan, it's a little different because the state's picking up the bill. So the liability isn't as much for you guys. This schedule here is the budget to actual. So you see there was no change in your budget. Most towns don't change their budget. The schools have the flexibility to move between budget lines up to 3%. So theirs tends to change, but the towns don't. So you can see $11 million in revenue is what you planned, 13 million is what you actually took in. You budgeted 11 million and then spent 12. A lot of that's because of the way that the education is shown on the tax commitment. So it's at net on the commitment. So this revenue here of $1.3 million isn't budgeted for essentially. So that's why it's different. You transferred out a net of $45,000, but you still increased your fund balance by $349,000. So it's at $2.9 million now. Skipping through the notes, I'm not going to talk about all of them because they have a lot of information in them, but I usually try to focus on the fixed assets. So these are the expenses that you've paid, and we've capitalized them for the accounting standards because their useful life is more than a year. So in 2020, you spent $302,000. That's the additions in the middle. Based on the useful life of the assets, the expense was $711,000. So the nice thing is you guys have available to you some reserves that you can spend as you need to keep up with the aging of the assets. So this was the general fund. This part here is the business type activity. So this is the sewer department, and they didn't really spend anything on anything major capital, but they had $170,000 in depreciation. So keep going on that. There's a lot of information in here because you guys have a benefit for your employees of paying their health insurance after they retire. So this is the estimated amount of the cost of the insurance over the period where you have to fund it. So it's about $70,000 a year. So it's called an other post-employment benefit. But you have tried to address that by utilizing the reserves. So there's some money available there. Keep going past the OPEB. Want to point out here, we were talking about main PERS. So the portion for the town is 563,000. The state's paying about 5 million in a liability to pay for the teacher's retirement plan. So that's what the liability is. But they funded a portion of it each year. So $211,000 is what's shown as on behalf payment. So that's money that the state kicked in to pay the pensions obligation. You can see here your investments. So there are different levels, level 1, 2, and 3. It's based on risk. So if you look at yours, level 1, the pricing is easily determined because it's all market driven. So you get to level 2 and level 3, and there's more estimates that have to be done in order to assign a value to those assets. So the $15 million that you have in investments is in stuff that is easy to determine the fair market value. You can look at your debt. So there's about $1.4 million in bonds. No, sorry, this is the leases. Most of that's the school lease. And you can see the payments over the next 5 years. So it's about $160,000, then it drops to 137, and then it's in 5-year increments thereafter. That's why those numbers jump up so much. And you can see each of the people that you owe money to for those leases. Now your short-term debt, you were able to not borrow any money this year because you had cash available to you from your undesignated funds. This is your long-term debt. So this is the 5 years. So it's about $440,000, and it drops back some as some of the debt gets paid off. So these are all of the different loans that you have out at June 30th, 2020. The biggest one being the RSU withdrawal bond. Accounts receivable. So these are the people that owe you money. The enterprise fund is the sewer department. So that $108,000 is what was out there for the sewer. Then you can see 146,000 for the ambulance. The TIF is 194, and then the school had $165,000 that was owed to them. One thing I usually point out is cash. So your carrying amount of your cash was 3.1 million. The bank balance was 3.5. 765,000 was covered by Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So if the bank went under, you get $765,000 from them. Category 2 is funds that are held at an institution that they've pledged another asset, like a U.S. Treasury bond or something like that, so that if the bank goes under, you'll get that bond in place of the cash that you have. So if the bank goes under, you'll get $2.8 million in another asset to put you in the same position. So there's relatively little risk that you will lose your money. Subsequent accounting pronouncements, you can read through those. Those are wonderful reading, informative. While we're talking about fixed assets before, you can see this is the useful life. So it's anything that costs over $5,000. And if it's a building, we depreciate it over 20 to 50 years. Machinery equipment is 5 to 10, improvements 10 to 20, and infrastructure is 10 to 50. So this is the sewer department. So it's comparative. So you can see you put through a rate increase. So your revenue went from $491,000 to $570,000. So that was good. If you look at your expenses, they held pretty steady. So you went from $199,000 net operating loss to $127,000. So you had another $46,000 in other revenue or expense, which most of that is picking up the interest expense and some capital maintenance costs that weren't capitalized. So your net position July 1st went from $2.5 million down to 2.3. But what I want to point out to you is we were talking about the depreciation. So that $169,000 was an expense that there was no cash outlay for. So in reality, the cash actually only really decreased by $30,000.
Mm.
So these are the trust funds. So you've got $93,000 in student activity funds for the school, which the town doesn't really have much to do with. And then you've got the private purpose trust. So those are invested for the benefit of beneficiaries. So, and the beneficiaries are the retirees. So you spent $106,000 last year on retiree benefits, and you had a $21,000 increase in those investments. So the investment account actually went down to $935,000. So that's why you've put the money away. I think there was money in the budget to add to it a little bit to bring it back up some. So all of those schedules in the back get consolidated. So this upper part here says major funds. So these are all the big ones. So the general fund is always by itself as a major fund. You've got your general equipment reserve, your capital reserve, construction reserve, cemetery, and recreation building. So these are all over 10%. And then you have all the other funds that get consolidated. So as a whole, you had $18 million in revenue last year and $16 million this year. And some of that was down because of investment income. Some of it was down because of education, because they didn't have as much in the way of grants and they didn't take in as much other revenue. So if you look at your expenses, majority of the expenses are paid out of the non-major funds and the general fund. So it's $15 million. Those other funds you transferred money out of. We saw that in those schedules in the back. So you took $518,000 out of reserve and another 100 out of the cemetery maintenance reserve. So you can see the general fund in total sent out $45,000 to other funds, which was the special revenue funds. But it still increased its fund balance by 350. You can see all the different reserves. So at the end of the day, all of your funds increased by about $1 million. So it went from 17.7 to 18.8, which is good. So that's the activity for the year. Now, as of June 30th, this is what you have and what you owe. So the general fund had $4.7 million in assets, $1.2 million in liabilities, deferred inflows of resources, which was related to tax revenue. So it's $496,000. So the fund balance was $2.9 million, which was made up of 4 different things. So non-spendable means you can't spend it until something is satisfied. This is inventory, it's tax acquired property. The restricted is school. Assigned is what the board motioned to carry over for future years. And unassigned is that $747,000. One thing I'll point out is in those non-major funds, you've got that negative $366,000. Those should be in assigned. But because they were negative, they have to be shown as unassigned. So you can see your fund balance went from 17 million to 18.8. And this is the way a lot of the information is presented to the board through the Trio software. So this is directly taken from that information and put into this format to meet the accounting standards. So then we take that information and we reconcile it to essentially the way that businesses do it. So they pick up the fixed assets and depreciate them over the useful life, and the loans are a liability, and as they get paid, they get reduced. So you can see $408,000 was what your depreciation exceeded your fixed asset additions. You paid $436,000 in principal on debt. Compensated absences changed very little. And then the change in the deferred property taxes was 192. So your net position was $1.2 million increase, where in the funds, it was $1 million increase. So it looks a little bit better because you have the large principal payments that are in there. This is the balances. So the change between these two items. So this is on the right is 2019, left is 2020. And then exhibit B is the statement of activities. So the focus of this is the net cost to the taxpayer. So it's a little unusual because it starts with your expenses to the left. So you had 15.7 million in expenses, but you had fees that you charged the taxpayer or other organizations. You had grants that you received, which most of that is your education subsidy. So it brought the next net cost to the taxpayer for the governmental activities to 11.5. And then for the wastewater, it was 192. You got $9.1 million from the taxpayer, $676,000 in excise taxes. Your intergovernmental is things like homestead reimbursement, revenue sharing, and other grants from the state. The main Yankee impact fee was 135,000, and then you had investment income of 1.1 million. An $11 gain from the disposal of property. So at the end of the day, $1.2 million change in net position. And as you can see, this is your balance sheet. So it's a statement of net position. And all of this does is it carries over from exhibits E and F. So a lot of the cash and investments is already on exhibit E. So it's $3 million in cash, accounts receivable. So it's about $20 million that's there. You have your fixed assets. That's property, plant, and equipment. So $34 million is the general fund. What you've spent so far on all of your, roads, vehicles, buildings, and equipment. And then there's the deferred outflows of resources related to the pension and other post-employment benefits. Then you can see you owe $1.7 million within the next year, 4.2 million of long-term liabilities, and then the deferred inflows of resources. So your net position is about $28 million. And then in the beginning, there's this thing called a management discussion and analysis. So this is a kind of wordy summary of a financial statements. It's supposed to explain how things are laid out and the importance of each of the different funds. So you can feel free to read that. And then at the beginning is the auditor's report. So it's addressed to the board. It talks about who's responsible for what between management and the auditor, and also gives the opinion. So it was an unqualified opinion. There's other matters, which is the required supplementary information, which we talked about that stuff. And then the other information, which is those Schedule Bs. And then it's dated and the location of our office. So I'll open it up to any questions that the board has.
Questions from the board?
I was trying to read his opinion really quickly there, but it just zipped by. And I should have read it beforehand because I know it was available to us, but.
Yep. So it's an unqualified opinion, which means we didn't find anything that would cause us to think that there's any material misstatements within the financial statements. So it's a little confusing because it's a negative connotation, but it's a good opinion. So
That's all I care about. Thank you.
In the past, our school audit and our town audits were done separately, right?
yep, Yes,
So,
they have been.
and you did them both together, or did you incorporate someone else's school audit into this?
yeah, we had to use a Ron Smith school audit to incorporate into this information.
Interesting.
So it all kind of rolls in because the special revenue accounts especially don't get reported by the town because they don't really know what the breakdown is of all the different expenses and the revenues. So we go back and we take the school's information and then put it into the format that you can use here in those special revenue accounts. So, and there's multiple of them. There'll be more next year when you get all the CARES Act money in there.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anything else?
So Fred, the basic bottom line, fiscal 20 was the town was in better financial shape than it was in fiscal 19.
Yep. So you managed your expenses well, which put $500,000 into your undesignated fund. Your revenues were, they added some more on top of that. So that was good. So I think you were in a tough place before where you had very little in undesignated fund, and now you're starting to build that up, which is great. It helps the town with cash flow, and it gives you a little bit more flexibility.
Okay, there are no other questions. Thank you, Mr. Brewer.
All right, thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Thank you.
I think that deserves a well done, Dennis, too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Yeah, if you want to go ahead and unshare, there we go. All right, so moving down to 9B resignation. Unfortunately, Kathy Martin Savage from the Future of the Schools Committee. I'm open for a motion.
I move that we accept Kathy Savage Martin's resignation with regret.
Second.
Moved by Terry, seconded by Kim. Calling for a vote. Terry,
Yes.
Dusty,
Yes.
Kim,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Motion passes 4-0. 9C, Main Service Center Coalition request to rejoin. Dennis sent us information on this and also talked about it in his manager's report. Anything you want to add, Dennis?
No, Kim was probably on the board before when this came up, and and previous boards didn't see a value in it, but I think it's a small investment for, when I talked to Matt Lucas about it, and Matt's like, Damascotta has done well with being part of this, so.
I'm for it.
Dusty,
Can you describe any specific benefit they've seen from it?
Yeah, you're increasing revenue sharing this year.
I support it.
So I assume we would need a motion. Want
Sure,
to join or?
sure.
Okay.
So it doesn't look like I'm spending the money without approval.
All right, I'm open for a motion.
Kim, do it. Make it up.
What is it? A regional service center? What's it called?
Main
Yeah.
Service Center Coalition.
I move that we authorize the town manager to enroll Wiscasset in the Regional Service Center Coalition.
Main Service Center Coalition.
That, Jackie, what she said.
Been moved.
Second.
Moved by Kim, seconded by Terry. Any further questions or discussion? Seeing none, calling for a vote. Terry,
Yes.
Dusty,
Yes.
Kim,
Yes.
I vote yes, motion passes 4-0.
Not done quite yet. You need to designate a representative and an alternative.
Ah,
Got it.
geez, you didn't mention that.
There.
I saved the best for last.
What does the representative have to do?
Attend the meetings and vote and things like that. I mean, it doesn't have to be a board member. It can be me.
Oh,
I vote for Dennis.
Me too.
second.
You could give it to Pam. I'm not here to object.
You're elected, Dennis.
That's fine. You want to do an alternative or no?
No.
Nah.
Okay,
Peaches.
moving on.
Yeah,
I have to send you the picture for today.
Oh, good.
yeah, put down Peach and Foxy for alternative.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, man. it's
all
just-
right, 9D, assessor's agent contract. Also have that in here. Any discussion or happy to move to a motion?
I move that we approve the assessor agent contract.
Second.
Any questions or discussion? Seeing none. Calling for a vote. Terry,
Yes.
Dusty,
Yes.
Kim,
Yes.
I vote yes, motion passes 4-0. Schedule budget workshop dates.
Kind of wish Pam was here for this conversation.
Yeah. Because it's important we're all there.
Well, if we're gonna do some Saturdays, which I think work pretty well, but she works every other Saturday and I don't know what Saturdays that is, so. I think this is something I could probably send out a poll to you guys and just, you guys can just send me back some dates. And we'll figure it out that way.
Yeah, why don't we do that and then we can put it on the website and announce it at the next meeting? Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, town managers report.
Any
Anything
questions,
you want to add?
questions on anything? One thing I would like to, that I sent this out ahead of time. One thing that I wish had happened before that didn't, is converting our streetlights over to LEDs. I've had a conversation with, what's their name? I got it right here. Real Term the other day. I don't know why they didn't do it when the county had the coalition that they were gonna do. And several other towns, a previous town manager didn't take advantage of that. I don't know why. I think this is something that we really need to do. Just a brief conversation with him. It would cost us about $140,000 to convert all these streetlights to LEDs. But then we would save about $42,000 a year in electricity and rental costs from CMP. So, over about 3 years, it would pay for itself. And then that $50-odd thousand that's in the budget this year for streetlights would be about $12,000. So I think this is something we should really move ahead with. And what I'm asking the board for permission to do is just send out an RFQ, an RFP, and see what interest we can get and see if there's somebody that really wants to do this so that I can, if we're going to do it, get it part of this budget this year. Save 40 grand from CMP.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Do we need to make a motion or can we just
If
give
you're
you
fine,
permission?
I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Because then we'll be looking at the RFPs when they come in, so.
Right.
Thank you, Dennis.
So,
Yeah,
other than
thank you.
I think somebody did mention too, they saw a post from Aaron on the AEDs in town. And I just want to make sure you guys understand that's two separate things from what I had in my manager's report about the cardiac monitors, which is a huge issue. And now we're being told it's probably going to take between 20 and 24 weeks to get these replaced. But the AEDs that we have around town are also facing a similar problem. The company that bought this other company out, didn't buy proprietary stuff that went along with it. So some of the AEDs in town that need service are just gonna have to be replaced. But we're gonna try to do some community stuff to try to raise some of that money to help get those, because there are 10 of those in town. And they will cost us about $1,500 a piece to replace, so anyways, if anybody asks you, that's what's going on with that.
Okay. Any other questions for Dennis? Okay, thank you. Down to 11, any other board business before we go into executive session? Okay. Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move to go into executive session.
You're gonna have to read it out.
Shoot. Yeah, see, I don't have that's why Kim has had to do all the work. I don't have the little,
Hang on, give me a second. I just have to flip over to
I just
find
found
my agenda.
I move to go into executive session pursuant to the provisions of Title 36, Section 841-2 MRSA to consider a request for abatement of taxes for reasons of poverty.
Thank you.
Second,
Moved by Terry, seconded by Kim. Calling for a vote. Terry,
Yes.
Dusty,
Yes.
Kim.
yes.
I vote yes. We are headed into executive session at 7:40. I believe there will be a vote to either approve or not the poverty abatement, but Dennis, correct me if I'm wrong, that will be the only business after, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Create a breakout room for this.
I would, but can you assign me host? I'm logged in as my USM, so I'm not on the right account. Okay, so I'll do a breakout room, assign manually. Okay, hopefully this,
So should we wait? for
you
the-
don't have to. I can tell you what,
if Someone would send me the times and the motions and who made them. That would be fine.
yeah, actually, we don't have to create a room if,
Yeah,
Well, if
okay.
it leaves, we don't need to.
yeah,
But hold on, I have to stop the YouTube.
yep. So yeah, Jackie, we'll send you that info. You're all set.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, good night.
Thanks, Jackie.
Um,
Good night, Jackie.
Sarah, I made you, so you have to go in and stop the YouTube.
Okay. Stop.